On December 8th in the year 1775, Colonel Benedict Arnold and General Richard Montgomery lead an American force in the siege of Quebec. The Americans hoped to capture the British-occupied city, and with it, win support for the American cause in Canada. In June, Congress decided to send 2 columns of 1,000 men each towards Canada. General Richard Montgomery proceeded up Lake Champlain and successfully captured Montreal in November before reaching Quebec City. Colonel Benedict Arnold led his men through the woods of Maine, approaching the city directly. On November 14th, Arnold arrived on the Plains of Abraham outside the city of Quebec. His men sustained themselves upon dog meat and leather in the cold winter. The 100 men defending the city refused to either surrender to Arnold or leave their defenses to fight them on open plains. So Arnold waited for Montgomery to join him with his troops and supplies at the beginning of December. The Royal Governor-General of Canada, Sir Guy Carleton, had managed to escape Montgomery's early successful attacks. He snuck into Quebec, organized 1,800 men for the city's defense, and prepared to wait out the Patriot siege. But Arnold and Montgomery faced a deadline as their troops' enlistments expired at the end of the year. On December 7th, Montgomery fired arrows over the city walls bearing letters and demanding Carleton's surrender. When Carleton did not acquiesce, the Americans began a bombardment of the city with Montgomery's cannon on December 8th. They then attempted a disastrous failed assault on December 31st, in which Montgomery continued his eternity and Arnold was seriously wounded. It was December 8th in the year 1980 that John Lennon, a former member of the Beatles, the rock group that transformed popular music in the 1960s, is shot by an obsessed fan in New York City. The 40-year-old artist was entering his luxury Manhattan apartment building when Mark David Chapman shot him 4 times at close range with a .38 caliber revolver. Lennon, bleeding profusely, was rushed to the hospital but continued his eternity en route. Chapman had received an autograph from Lennon earlier in the day and voluntarily remained at the scene of the shooting until he was arrested by police. For a week, hundreds of bereaved fans kept a vigil outside the Dakota Lennon's apartment building, and demonstrations of mournings were held around the world. John Lennon was one half of the singing-songwriting team that made the Beatles the most popular musical group of the 20th century. The other band leader was Paul McCartney, but the rest of the quartet, George Harrison and Ringo Starr, sometimes penned and sang their own songs as well. Hailing from Liverpool, England, and influenced by early American rock and roll, the Beatles took Britain by storm in 1963 with the single Please Please Me. Beatlemania spread to the U.S. in 1964 with the release of I Want to Hold Your Hand, followed by a sensational U.S. tour. With youth poised to break away from the culturally rigid landscape of the 1950s, the Fab Four, with their exuberant music and good-natured rebellion, were the perfect catalyst for the shift. The Beatles sold millions of records and starred in hit movies such as Hard Day's Night in 1964. Their live performances were near riots, with teenage girls screaming and fainting as their boyfriends nodded along to the catchy pop songs. In 1966, the Beatles gave up touring to concentrate on their innovative studio recordings, such as 1967's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, a psychedelic concept album that is regarded as a masterpiece of popular music. The Beatles' music remained relevant to youth throughout the great cultural shifts of the 1960s, and critics of all ages acknowledged the songwriting genius of the Lennon-McCartney team. Lennon was considered the intellectual Beatle and certainly was the most outspoken of the four. He caused a major controversy in 1966 when he declared that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus, prompting mass burnings of Beatles records in the American Bible Belt. He later became an anti-war activist and flirted with communism in the lyrics of solo hits like Imagine, recorded after the Beatles disbanded in 1970. In 1975, Lennon dropped out of the music business to spend more time with his Japanese-born wife, Yoko Ono, and their son, Sean. In 1980, he made a comeback with Double Fantasy, a critically acclaimed album that celebrated his love for Yoko and featured songs written by her. 25-year-old Mark David Chapman, the man who shot John Lennon, was deemed borderline psychotic by psychiatrists. He was instructed to plead insanity, but instead he pleaded guilty to murder. He was sentenced to 20 years to life. In the year 2000, New York State prison officials denied Chapman a parole hearing, telling him that his, quote, vicious and violent act was apparently fueled by your need to be acknowledged, unquote. He remains behind bars. John Lennon is memorialized in Strawberry Fields, a section of Central Park across the street from the Dakota that Yoko Ono landscaped in honor of her husband. On December 8th, in 1993, the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, is signed into law by President Bill Clinton, our nation's 42nd president. Clinton said he hoped the agreement would encourage other nations to work towards a broader World Trade Pact. NAFTA, a trade pact between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, eliminated virtually all tariffs and trade restrictions between the three nations. The passage of NAFTA was one of Clinton's first major victories as the first Democratic president in 12 years, though the movement for free trade in North America had begun as a Republican initiative. During its planning stages, NAFTA was heavily criticized by Reform Party presidential candidate Ross Perot, who argued that if NAFTA was passed, Americans would hear a giant sucking sound of American companies fleeing the United States from Mexico, where employees would work for less pay and without benefits. The pact, which took effect on January 1st in 1994, created the world's first free trade zone. information documented and divulged on this audio file can be verified on history.com.